The divorce papers were sitting right there on my kitchen table like a fucking present I never asked for. Not hidden, not tucked away. Somewhere I might miss them, just spread out neat as you please, next to the salt and pepper shakers, with a yellow sticky note that said, "Please review," and sign where indicated. Like I was supposed to thank her for the convenience. My name is Oliver Gonzalez. I'm 52 years old, and I've been a CPA for 24 years. I notice when things don't add up. And what definitely didn't add up was the filing date on these papers. Exactly 1 month after I'd added Jaden to the deed of my house. 1 month to the day. The papers cited irreconcilable differences and sought equitable distribution of marital assets, specifically naming our family home worth $650,000. Our home, right? Because apparently 8 months of marriage entitled her to half of everything I'd built over 2 decades. I dropped my briefcase and stared at the documents, my accounting brain automatically cataloging the details. Professional letterhead from Morrison and Associates Family Law. 3 different colored tabs marking where my signature was required. A neat stack of supporting documentation that looked suspiciously thorough for someone who claimed she didn't understand legal stuff. That's when I noticed what wasn't there. I walked to our home office, my home office, and opened the filing cabinet where I kept our financial documents. 17 bank statements missing from the past 2 years. Gone. The folder where I stored my business account summaries, empty. Even the insurance paperwork from when my first wife died had vanished. Jaden had been thorough, I'd give her that. And here I'd thought her questions about my filing system were just sweet wifely interest in my organized little world. The real kicker? Last night over dinner, she'd mentioned so casually that she'd need to come by tomorrow to grab some additional paperwork for her attorney meetings. Because apparently there were attorney meetings I didn't know about, for a divorce I definitely hadn't agreed to. I pulled out my phone and called my sister. "Oliver?" Stephanie answered on the first ring. "What's wrong? You never call on weekdays." She filed for divorce. The words came out flat, matter of fact, like I was telling her about the weather. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me everything. Not surprise. Recognition. "Oh, Oliver, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "Where are you?" "Home." She left the papers on the kitchen table, very considerate of her. "I'm coming over right now." "Steph, you don't have to—" "I'm coming over. Don't do anything stupid until I get there." Too late for that advice, I thought as I hung up. Adding her to my house deed after 8 months probably qualified as the stupidest thing I'd done in years. I was still staring at the papers when I heard a key in the front door. But it wasn't Stephanie, it was my daughter Addison, and she looked like she'd been crying. "Dad." She came straight over and hugged me, which should have been comforting except for what she said next. "I tried to warn you about her, Dad, but you wouldn't listen." Before I could respond, my son Marcus walked in carrying bags from that Thai place downtown. He's 24, just finished his master's degree, and apparently had the same thought process as his aunt. "Figured you wouldn't want to cook tonight," he said, setting the food on the counter. With everything happening, I looked between my 2 kids, both of whom seemed remarkably unsurprised by this development. "How did you know about the divorce papers?" "I just found them 20 minutes ago." Addison and Marcus exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "We didn't know about the papers specifically," Addison said carefully. "But we've been expecting something like this for months." "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus started unpacking the food with deliberate focus. "It means we all saw this coming, Dad. We tried to tell you." Stephanie burst through the door at that moment, carrying a bottle of wine and looking like she was ready for war. She took one look at the scene. Me standing there holding divorce papers, my kids moving around the kitchen like they were preparing for a wake, and her expression shifted from worry to grim satisfaction. "Well," she said, setting the wine down harder than necessary, "I guess we're finally having that conversation you wouldn't let me have 6 months ago." And that's how I found myself sitting at my own kitchen table eating pad thai and listening to my family enumerate all the ways they'd tried to save me from my own stupidity. "She never had any local friends," Addison said, picking at her spring rolls. "In 8 months, did she ever mention anyone from work? Anyone she knew from before you met?" I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it, because she was right. "And those phone calls," Marcus added. "Always stepping out to take them, always whispering. When's the last time you answered her phone when it rang?" "Never." The answer was never. "She asked me about your business," Stephanie said quietly. "Specifically about your client list and how much you charge. When I told her that was private information, she laughed and said she was just curious about her husband's work, but it felt wrong. She deserved to know about my business," I said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Dad." Addison's voice was gentle but firm. "She asked me how much Mom's life insurance paid out, and whether you'd kept any of her jewelry." Why would she need to know that? The answer was obvious, but I didn't want to see it. Stephanie leaned forward. Oliver, I tried to talk to you about this 3 different times. About how fast everything happened. About how she moved in here 6 weeks after your first date. About how she knew exactly what to say to make you feel less lonely. You told me I was being jealous, I said, remembering. That I should mind my own business. Because you wouldn't listen, Stephanie's voice cracked. Every time I brought up any concern, you shut me down. You said I was trying to interfere with your happiness. And when I mentioned her shopping, Addison said, all those expensive clothes and spa treatments while she claimed she was still struggling financially from her previous divorce, you said I was being judgmental? Marcus nodded. I tried to ask about her background once. Just casual questions about where she grew up, what she did before you met, and you accused me of interrogating her. I remembered that fight. I told him he was making her uncomfortable, that he needed to give her space to adjust to our family. We hadn't spoken for 3 weeks after that. She played us perfectly, I realized out loud. She made me think you were all against her, so I'd stop listening to you. And we let her, Stephanie said bitterly, because we didn't want to lose you completely. So we backed off and watched her isolate you from us. The wine Stephanie had brought wasn't for celebration, it was for commiseration. She poured generous glasses for all of us while I tried to process how thoroughly I'd been played. The grief support group, I said suddenly. She knew exactly what to say because she'd heard it all before. She knew how to spot someone vulnerable. I thought about that night 6 months after my first wife, Carmen, died. Carmen had fought ovarian cancer for 2 years, and I'd spent those years driving between her chemotherapy appointments and client meetings, trying to keep my practice running while watching the love of my life fade away. After she died, I couldn't bear the thought of risking that kind of loss again. That's why I'd gotten a vasectomy. I couldn't imagine leaving more children without a parent if something happened to me. But at that grief support group, sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement, Jaden had looked at me with those blue eyes full of understanding and said she knew exactly how it felt to lose your whole world. She told me about losing her husband in a car accident, about the terrible loneliness, about not knowing how to rebuild when everything you'd planned was gone. It had all been bullshit. Every tear, every shared moment of pain, every late-night conversation about how hard it was to imagine loving someone else, all of it calculated to make me feel less alone. I added her to the house deed, I told them quietly. 8 months after we met. She said it would make her feel secure, like she finally had a real home again. None of them looked surprised by this either. The timing of the divorce filing isn't an accident, Stephanie said. 1 month after the deed transfer gives her just enough time to establish legal claim to the property, without looking too obvious about it. As a CPA, I should have seen this. I analyze financial decisions for a living. I tell clients to wait, to be careful, to protect their assets. But when it came to my own life, I'd been so desperate to feel whole again that I'd ignored every red flag my family tried to wave. We sat in silence for a while, the takeout containers getting cold between us. Finally, my kids started cleaning up, moving around my kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who'd grown up here. Stephanie helped, and I watched them take care of me the same way they had during Carmen's illness, the same way they'd tried to take care of me when I was too grief-blind to see what was happening. I'm sorry, I said as they prepared to leave. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I chose her over your concerns. I'm sorry I let her drive wedges between us. Stephanie hugged me tightly. We're family, Oliver. We'll figure this out. Addison kissed my cheek. We'll come by tomorrow to check on you, okay? Marcus squeezed my shoulder. Don't sign anything until you talk to a lawyer. And then they were gone, leaving me alone with the divorce papers and the devastating realization that my family had been trying to save me all along. I'd been so determined to protect my new happiness that I'd pushed away the people who actually cared about my well-being. The house felt impossibly quiet. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd found the papers, surrounded by the evidence of my own foolishness, and finally understood what my family had been trying to tell me for months. My grief had made me the perfect target, and Jaden had played me like a goddamn fiddle. The knock on my front door at 7:30 the next morning wasn't unexpected. After last night's revelations, I figured Stephanie would show up with coffee and probably more unsolicited advice about divorce lawyers. What I didn't expect was the 60-something man standing on my porch, wearing worn jeans and a faded denim shirt, holding a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Oliver Gonzalez? He asked, extending a calloused hand. My name is Jesse Yoon. I was married to your wife. I stared at him, because apparently my Tuesday was about to get a whole lot more complicated than I'd planned. I'm sorry, what? I know this is strange, Jesse said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. But I've been monitoring public records for property transfers involving my ex-wife ever since my own divorce 3 years ago. When your name was added to a deed with hers last month, I came directly here to warn you. My brain started doing that thing it does with numbers, cataloging, analyzing, looking for patterns. 1 month ago, exactly when I'd added Jaden to the deed. And this man had been tracking that information specifically. You want to come in? I asked, because standing on my front porch discussing my wife's previous marriage with a complete stranger felt like the kind of thing that would give the neighbors something to talk about for months. Jesse nodded and followed me inside. In my kitchen, he opened the manila folder and spread out documents across the same table where I'd found my divorce papers yesterday. Court papers, property records, photographs, all organized with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that my accountant brain appreciated. This is the deed to my family's ranch, he said, pointing to a document. 200 acres in Montana that my grandfather homesteaded. And this, he slid another paper across, is the divorce decree where I lost half of it to your wife. I picked up the divorce papers. The woman's name listed was Jessica Martinez, not Jaden Patterson, but the signature at the bottom looked familiar, and the filing date made my stomach drop. How long after you added her to the deed? I asked. Exactly 1 month after, Jesse corrected. Just like yours. He handed me another set of documents. She filed these divorce papers exactly 1 month after I added her to the ranch deed. 1 month to the day. The pattern was right there in black and white. And suddenly, every financial instinct I'd ignored for the past year started screaming. She targets widowers, Yamal, Jesse continued, settling into the chair across from me. Specifically through grief support groups. She presents herself as a fellow widow who understands the pain of losing your whole world. Her husband died in a car accident, I said automatically, then felt stupid for defending her when the evidence was literally sitting in front of me. Jesse shook his head. She's never been widowed. That sob story about losing her husband? Complete fabrication. She's told that same story with minor variations to at least 4 different men that I know of. He pulled out a photograph, a professional headshot of a woman with dark brown hair cut in a bob, green eyes instead of blue, but definitely the same face. This is her as Maria Santos, age 35, recently widowed when her husband died of cancer. Another photo. Jennifer Walsh, 33, lost her husband in a construction accident. A third photo showed blonde hair and a pixie cut. And Sarah Chen, 36, whose husband was killed by a drunk driver. Each photo showed the same woman, but with completely different styling. Different hair colors, different makeup, different clothing styles. Like she was an actress playing different roles. She's very good at reinventing herself, Jesse said quietly. New identity, new backstory, new tragedy to explain why she needs someone to take care of her. Why are you telling me this instead of going to the police? Jesse's expression hardened. Because we've been building a case for identity fraud and conspiracy, but we need evidence from all her victims to establish the pattern across state lines. She's not just committing marriage fraud, she's using multiple false identities, forged social security numbers, fake driver's licenses. Me and 2 other men she's done this to. We've been coordinating for months, tracking her through her various identities, documenting everything. He handed me a business card with phone numbers written on the back. Tom Rodriguez in Texas lost his cattle operation. David Kim in Arizona lost his hardware store. Same pattern every time. I stared at the card, processing what he was telling me. This wasn't just my problem. This was a coordinated crime spree, and I was just the latest mark. She researches her targets thoroughly, Jesse continued. Your family dynamics, your financial situation, your emotional vulnerabilities. She knew about your late wife's cancer treatment, your children's concerns about inheritance, your sister's protective tendencies. She planned how to isolate you from anyone who might interfere. That hit like a punch to the gut. Because he was right. Every argument I'd had with my family, every time I'd defended Jaden against their concerns, she'd orchestrated all of it. The grief support group gives her access to men who are emotionally vulnerable and financially stable, Jesse said. She studies the group dynamics for weeks before targeting someone specific. In your case, she probably attended 6 or 7 meetings before ever speaking to you directly. I thought back to that first night I'd noticed her. She'd been sitting across the circle, nodding sympathetically while other people shared their stories. I'd assumed she was just shy, processing her own grief quietly, but she'd been taking notes. Mental notes about everyone's situation, everyone's vulnerabilities. How long were you married to her? I asked. 2 years. She was patient with me, understanding about my grief, supportive when I struggled with depression after my wife died. His voice was bitter. She helped me through the worst period of my life, and I thought I'd found someone who truly understood loss. And then she disappeared with half your ranch. The day after the divorce was finalized, Jesse's hands clenched into fists. Left a note saying she needed space to figure out her life. By the time I realized what had happened, she was gone. New identity, new state, new victim. I heard a car door slam outside. Jaden's Honda pulling into the driveway, right on schedule. She'd mentioned needing to come by this morning to collect additional paperwork for her attorney meetings. Attorney meetings I definitely hadn't agreed to. That's her, I said, watching through the window as she walked up the front path, her cream cashmere sweater and designer handbag looking perfectly put together as always. Jesse gathered his documents quickly but efficiently. Let me handle this. She needs to see that her pattern has been exposed. Jaden's key turned in the front door and I heard her call out, "Oliver, I'm just grabbing those tax documents we discussed." She walked into the kitchen and froze. Her blue eyes went from me to Jesse to the papers spread across the table, and her face went completely white. "Hello, Jessica," Jesse said calmly. "Or should I say Maria? Sarah? I lose track of which name you're using these days." For a split second, something raw and panicked flashed across her face. Then she spun toward the front door, but Jesse moved to block her path. "I think we need to have a conversation," he said. Jaden straightened her shoulders and turned back to face us, her expression shifting from panic to wounded innocence faster than I could blink. "Oliver, who is this man? Why is he in our house?" "Our house," I repeated. Interesting choice of words for someone who's been married to me for 8 months. "Oliver, I don't know what this person has told you, but he's clearly disturbed." Her voice took on that soft, reasonable tone she used when she was trying to make me feel protective of her. "This man has been stalking me for years. He's obsessed with me, and he won't leave me alone." Jesse remained completely calm. "Is that why you filed for divorce exactly 1 month after I added you to my property deed? Because I was stalking you?" "Oliver," Jaden said, ignoring Jesse completely and focusing on me with those wide blue eyes. "You're scaring me. This man is obviously unstable, and now he's turning you against me. This is exactly the kind of possessive, controlling behavior that—" "That what?" I interrupted. "That makes you file for divorce and claim half my house?" She blinked, her rhythm disrupted. "That's not— We can discuss our relationship privately, but this man has no business being here, making wild accusations." Jesse pulled out one of the photographs and held it up. "Explain this photo of us at our wedding, then. Unless you have a twin sister named Jessica Martinez who happened to marry me in Montana 3 years ago." Jaden glanced at the photo and I watched her face cycle through a dozen micro-expressions before settling on defiant anger. "I want you out of my house immediately," she said to Jesse, her voice rising. "And if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." She pulled out her phone, but her hand was shaking. Jesse smiled. "Please do. I'd love to explain to them about the identity fraud charges we've been building, and the forged documents, and the multiple social security numbers." Jaden stared at him, phone in her hand, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked completely trapped. The phone stayed frozen in her hand for what felt like an eternity, and I watched something I'd never seen before, Jaden completely out of moves. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she wasn't dialing, because calling the cops meant explaining why a man she claimed not to know had wedding photos of them together. It meant answering questions about why she had multiple names and social security numbers. And for the first time since I'd known her, she couldn't spin her way out of the corner she was trapped in. Slowly, like she was moving underwater, she lowered the phone without making the call. "Explain," I said. "Explain how you know this man." Jesse laid another document on the table, a marriage certificate with her signature clear as day. "Jessica Martinez," he read aloud. "Married to Jesse Yoon on September 15th, 3 years ago." "I don't know this person," Jaden said, but her voice had lost that confident edge. "Oliver, this man is clearly disturbed. He's created fake documents to support his delusions about me." "Delusions?" Jesse reached into his folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. Wedding photos. Professional ones, not the kind you fake in Photoshop over a weekend. "Here's us cutting the cake. Here's you in the white dress your grandmother supposedly left you. The same story you told Oliver about your first wedding, I'm guessing." She glanced at the photos and I watched her face cycle through panic, anger, and calculation before settling on wounded victim mode. "Oliver," she said, turning those blue eyes on me with practiced tears starting to form. "This man was my husband, yes, but he was abusive, controlling. He made my life hell for 2 years, and when I finally found the courage to leave him, he became obsessed with me. He's been stalking me ever since." The shift was so smooth it would have been impressive if it wasn't completely fucking terrifying. 2 minutes ago, she didn't know Jesse. Now he was her abusive ex who'd been stalking her for years. Abusive? Jesse repeated calmly. Is that why you filed for divorce exactly 1 month after I added you to my property deed? Because I was so controlling? You don't understand what it was like, she said, and now the tears were flowing freely. He isolated me from everyone, made me financially dependent on him. When I finally escaped, I deserved that settlement for everything I'd suffered. And there it was. The truth mixed in with the lies, just enough to make it believable. She was admitting to the marriage, to the settlement, but spinning it as justice for abuse that never happened. That's interesting, I said, my accountant brain kicking into overdrive. Because last week you told me your only previous marriage was to David, who died in that car accident. Remember David? Your tragic loss that brought us together at Grief Support Group? Her tears stopped like someone had turned off a faucet. For just a second I saw something cold and calculating flash across her face before the victim mask slammed back into place. I was ashamed, she whispered. Ashamed that I'd stayed with someone who hurt me. It was easier to say David died than to admit I'd been weak enough to let someone abuse me. You wouldn't understand. You've never been in that situation. Jesus Christ. Even cornered, even caught red-handed, she was still working the angles. Still playing the victim card while simultaneously claiming she deserved hundreds of thousands of dollars for her supposed suffering. That's remarkable, Jesse said, because you told me the exact same story about your previous husband David when we met. Dead in a car accident, your great love cut short. Very moving story. I'm sure Oliver found it just as compelling as I did. The mask slipped again, just for a heartbeat. And in that moment, I saw her for what she really was. Not a grieving widow, not an abuse victim, not the emotionally fragile woman who needed my protection. Just a predator who'd gotten very, very good at wearing whatever face would get her what she wanted. Through my communications with the other victims, Jesse continued, pulling out his phone, we've discovered that you've used at least 3 different legal names across your various marriages. Jessica Martinez with me, Jennifer Walsh with Tom in Texas, Sarah Chen with David in Arizona, each time obtaining new identification documents, new social security numbers. That's impossible, Jaden said, but she was looking at Jesse's phone like it might bite her. Tom Rodriguez lost his cattle operation to Jennifer Walsh, Jesse said, scrolling through his contacts. David Kim lost his hardware store to Sarah Chen. Same pattern every time. Grief support group, sob story about your dead husband, quick marriage, property deed transfer, divorce filing exactly 1 month later. I stared at her, this woman I'd shared a bed with for 8 months, and realized I didn't know her at all. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every time she'd comforted me about Carmen's death, all of it calculated. All of it part of a script she'd perfected on at least 3 other men. That's when I heard car, doors slamming in my driveway. Shit, I muttered, looking out the window. Stephanie's minivan and Marcus's Honda were both pulling up to the curb. My family's back. Jaden's eyes lit up like she'd just been thrown a lifeline, and I realized she was about to try to turn my own family against me. The front door burst open and Stephanie marched in like she was leading a cavalry charge, with Addison and Marcus right behind her. Oliver, Mrs. Henderson called and said there was shouting on your front porch, Stephanie announced, then stopped dead when she saw Jesse and the documents spread across my kitchen table. What's going on here? Perfect timing, Jaden said, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Oliver's family, I need your help. This man has been stalking me for years, and now he's somehow convinced Oliver that I'm some kind of criminal. Oliver's become so paranoid and controlling since this man showed up. But instead of the concerned family rally she was expecting, my sister, daughter, and son just looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Controlling? Addison said slowly. Dad's been defending you for months while we tried to tell him something was wrong. Paranoid? Marcus added. You mean finally listening to what we've been saying since you moved in here? And Stephanie, God bless Stephanie and her protective instincts, took one look at the documents on the table and said, Are those divorce papers from another marriage? Jaden's face went white, because she'd forgotten something crucial about my family. They'd been trying to warn me about her for months. They'd seen through her act from the beginning, and she'd been so focused on isolating me from them that she'd never bothered to win them over. Oliver, she tried again, you're scaring me. This obsessive behavior, bringing strangers into our home, accusing me of things that aren't true. This isn't the man I married. No, I said quietly. The man you married was a grief-stricken fool who was so desperate not to be alone that he ignored every red flag you threw up. But that man's gone now. The room went dead silent. Even Jesse stopped shuffling through his papers. What are our legal options for protecting the house? Stephanie asked Jesse, completely bypassing Jaden like she wasn't even there. If she's using false identification documents, any marriage license might be invalid, Jesse replied. But that takes time to prove, and she usually disappears before legal proceedings can move forward. Disappears? Marcus looked alarmed. What do you mean disappears? She vanishes, Jesse said simply. New identity, new state, new victim. By the time you could get a court order to freeze assets, she'd be long gone. What about Dad's business? Addison asked, her voice tight with worry. If this gets out, if clients find out he was married to someone using false identification, it could destroy his reputation. And that's when it hit me. Jaden wasn't just trying to steal my house. She was threatening everything I'd built over 24 years. My practice, my professional reputation, my relationships with clients who trusted me with their financial lives. Don't you think you're all being a little dramatic? Jaden said, but her voice was getting higher, more desperate. Oliver and I are having some marriage difficulties. That doesn't make me a criminal. Marriage difficulties, Stephanie repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling identity fraud these days? Jaden turned to me with those blue eyes that had once made me feel understood and protected. Oliver, please, you know me. You know I love you. Don't let them turn you against me like this. But I was done being manipulated. Done being the grief-stricken fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him. I don't know you at all, I said. I don't even know your real name. She flinched like I'd slapped her. And for just a moment, the mask came completely off, and I saw something raw and desperate underneath. Something that had probably been broken long before she ever met me. We should call our family attorney, Stephanie said. Get ahead of this before it gets worse. No, Jesse said sharply. The moment she senses this is becoming a legal matter, she'll bolt. Tonight, probably. You'll wake up tomorrow and she'll be gone, along with any chance of getting justice or recovering your assets. Then what do you suggest? I asked. Jesse pulled out his phone again. The other victims and I have been building a case for months. Identity fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud across state lines. We have documentation, financial records, communication logs. But we need her cooperation or confession to make the charges stick. And how exactly do we get that? You don't let her know how much trouble she's in, Jesse said. You make her think she can still win. Desperate people make mistakes, and we need her to make one big enough to hang herself with. I looked at Jaden, who was standing in my kitchen, looking cornered and dangerous. She'd already shifted tactics twice in the last 10 minutes. From denial to victim to desperate manipulation. And I could see her calculating her next move, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from her. Oliver, she said softly, I know this looks bad, but if you'll just give me a chance to explain everything privately without all these people trying to turn you against me. No more private conversations, I said. No more chances to spin your story. From now on, everything happens with witnesses. Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or rage carefully contained. She was realizing that her usual tactics weren't working anymore. That she couldn't isolate me, couldn't manipulate my emotions, couldn't divide me from my family the way she had for months. Tom and David are flying in tomorrow, Jesse said quietly. The other victims. We've been coordinating for months, building evidence, documenting her pattern. If you're willing to work with us, we can finally stop her. I looked around my kitchen, at my sister, my children, this stranger who'd risked everything to warn me, and the woman who'd systematically destroyed my judgment for 8 months. The woman who'd used my grief as a weapon against me, who'd turned my love for Carmen into a tool for her own enrichment. And I realized that Jesse was right. She'd disappear the moment she sensed real legal trouble coming, just like she had with the others, just like she'd probably done dozens of times before. I needed to act fast before she vanished and left me with nothing but divorce papers and the wreckage of my own stupidity. The first thing I did after Jesse and my family left was exactly what any good accountant would do when facing a financial crisis. I pulled out my calculator and started running numbers. Not the numbers Jaden expected me to run, though. She probably figured I'd be calculating how much I could afford to pay her to go away quietly. Instead, I was calculating how much time I had before she disappeared with half my life savings. Because that's what this was really about, timing. And for the first time in 8 months, I was going to control it instead of letting her set the pace. I started with our credit card statements. Jaden always offered to help with the paperwork when they arrived each month, which I'd thought was sweet. Turns out it was research. She'd been systematically learning our spending patterns, our cash flow, our financial vulnerabilities. But she'd also left a paper trail that told a very different story than the one she'd been selling me. Morrison and Associates Family Law. 4 charges in the past 2 months, totaling $8,400. That wasn't basic divorce paperwork money. That was aggressive litigation strategy money. And the dates? The first consultation was scheduled 2 weeks before she'd filed, which meant she'd been planning this divorce before I even knew we were having problems. Before our last anniversary dinner, before she'd told me she loved me and wanted to spend the rest of her life making me happy. Jesus Christ, I'd been living with someone who was literally billing hours to destroy me while I slept next to her every night. I picked up my phone and called the number Jesse had written on the back of his business card. Tom Rodriguez. The voice answered on the second ring. This is Oliver Gonzalez. Jesse gave me your number. The accountant in California. Yeah, Jesse told us you might call. How bad is it? Direct. I liked that. She filed for divorce exactly 1 month after I added her to my house deed. Sound familiar? Identical timeline. She took half my cattle operation using the exact same pattern. Tom's voice was bitter but controlled. What do you want to know? Everything. How she operates, what comes next, how to stop her. For the next 20 minutes, Tom walked me through what he called the Jennifer Walsh playbook. Apparently that was the name she'd used with him. The grief support group approach, the gradual isolation from family, the strategic timing of legal moves. The way she'd push for quick settlements to avoid lengthy court proceedings that might expose her pattern. She's probably already researching her next target, Tom said. Once she files, she starts planning her exit strategy. In my case, she joined a grief support group in Arizona before our divorce was even finalized. David Kim called me back an hour later with more details about her financial strategies. She'd learned to time property transfers and divorce filings to maximize her settlements while minimizing the paper trail that could expose her pattern. The quick turnaround wasn't just about efficiency. It was about staying ahead of any investigation that might connect her various identities. The woman I married called herself Sarah Chen, David said. Took half my hardware store and vanished before I even understood what had happened. But we've been building a case for 18 months now. Identity fraud across state lines, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. We just needed one more victim to establish the pattern. You mean me? We mean someone willing to fight back instead of just paying her to disappear. That hit home, because my first instinct had been exactly what my family suggested. Cut my losses, pay her whatever she wanted, get her out of my life as quickly as possible. It's what I'd probably advise a client in the same situation. Minimize damage, move on, chalk it up to expensive life education. But I wasn't just any client. I was a CPA who'd spent 24 years analyzing financial irregularities and building cases from paper trails. And more importantly, I was a man who'd already lost everything once when Carmen died. I wasn't about to let some predator take what I'd rebuilt just because she was good at playing victim. When Jaden came home that evening, I was ready. She walked in carrying shopping bags from 3 different boutiques, humming something under her breath, looking relaxed and confident for someone who'd just filed to divorce her husband of 8 months. Oliver, honey, she said, setting down her bags with a satisfied sigh. I know this is all difficult, but I really think we can work through this amicably. I spoke with my attorney today, and she thinks we can avoid a lengthy court battle if we're both reasonable about the settlement. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing our credit card statements. Your attorney must be expensive. $8,000 in 2 months. For just a split second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or calculation? I wanted to make sure I understood my rights, she said carefully. This is all new to me, Oliver. I've never been through a divorce before. That's interesting, said, keeping my voice neutral. Because according to these bills, you've been discussing community property laws, asset protection strategies, and expedited settlement procedures. That's pretty sophisticated stuff for someone who's never been divorced. She sat down across from me, and I watched her switch tactics in real time. The confident woman who'd been shopping all afternoon transformed into the vulnerable, confused wife I'd fallen in love with. I was scared, she said, her voice getting smaller. When I saw how angry you were getting, how you were turning your family against me, I thought I needed to protect myself. The attorney said I should understand my options in case things got worse. How I was turning my family against you? Oliver, you know how they've been treating me. Your sister, your kids, they've never accepted me. And lately you've been so distant, so suspicious. I was terrified you were planning to leave me with nothing. And there it was. The complete reversal of reality that had worked so well for 8 months. I was the problem. I was the one creating conflict. She was just protecting herself from my unreasonable behavior. Except this time, I had my phone recording the entire conversation. So when you discuss community property laws, I said, that's because you're scared I might leave you with nothing? I just wanted to understand what would happen if we couldn't work things out. And when you research expedited settlement procedures, that's also fear-based? She hesitated, just for a moment, but long enough for me to see her calculating whether I actually knew what I was talking about or if I was fishing. The attorney mentioned that quick settlements are usually better for both parties, she said finally. Less expensive, less emotional damage. I thought that would be good for us. Because you want to avoid a lengthy legal battle? Of course, why would I want to drag this out? Perfect. Because Tom had warned me this was exactly what she'd say. The push for speed wasn't about protecting our emotions or saving money. It was about getting her settlement before any fraud investigation could expose her pattern. You're right, I said, closing my laptop. A quick settlement would probably be best for everyone. Relief flooded her face so completely that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Really? Oliver, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. I know it's hard, but I think this could work out well for both of us. What are you thinking in terms of timeline? Well, my attorney says if we can agree on asset division within the next few weeks, we could probably finalize everything within 60 days. Clean, simple, amicable. 60 days. Just enough time to get her settlement and disappear before any coordinated investigation could move forward. That sounds fair, I said. Why don't we discuss the details over dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere neutral where we can talk privately. That's a wonderful idea. She actually smiled. A genuine, relieved smile that told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was in her victory. Where did you have in mind? Rosario's on 5th Street. They have those private booths in the back where we can talk without interruption. Perfect. Should we say 7 o'clock? 7 works. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, the first affectionate gesture she'd made in weeks. Thank you for being so mature about this, Oliver. I know it's hard, but I really think this is what's best for both of us. After she went upstairs to get ready for her evening yoga class, another new expense on our joint credit card, I called Jesse back. She agreed to dinner tomorrow night, I told him. Rosario's on 5th Street, 7 o'clock. We'll be ready, Jesse said. Tom's flight gets in at noon. David's driving up from San Diego. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I thought about Carmen, about the 2 years I'd spent watching her fight for every day while cancer tried to take her from me, about the promises I'd made to her about protecting our family, our home, our children's future, about how this predator had used my grief over losing the love of my life as a weapon against me. I'm sure. Your family attorney? Standing by. Papers are ready. Motions filed but not served. He'll be available on short notice. Good. What about your family? Are they going to interfere? I looked toward the kitchen where Stephanie had left a bottle of wine with a note that said, "For after you come to your senses," where Addison had forgotten her jacket, draped over the chair where she'd sat last night while my family tried to save me from my own stupidity, where Marcus had stacked the leftover Thai food containers so neatly, the same way he'd organized everything after his mother's funeral. They think I'm being weak, I said. They think I'm giving up. Good, keep it that way. The less they know about tomorrow night, the better. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and looked around at the house Carmen and I had built together. The place where we'd raised our kids, celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, planned dreams. The home Jaden thought she could claim half of just because she'd managed to manipulate a grieving widower for 8 months. But grief had made me vulnerable, not stupid. And she'd forgotten something important about targeting a CPA. We're really, really good with numbers, including the number of victims it takes to establish a federal conspiracy case. Tomorrow night, Jaden was going to learn that some marks fight back. I arrived at Rosario's 45 minutes early, which gave me time to set up everything exactly the way Jesse had coached me. Corner booth in the back section where conversations wouldn't carry to other tables. Clear sight lines to the entrance so I could see Jaden coming. Most importantly, a table big enough for 4 additional people when the time came. The hostess recognized me from the reservation call I'd made that morning, the one where I'd explained we might need to move to a private room later, and asked about their policy on recording conversations. Turns out restaurants don't love being used for divorce ambushes, but they're surprisingly accommodating when you mention potential criminal activity and tip well in advance. I ordered a coffee and spread out the folder Jesse had prepared. To anyone watching, it looked like business documents, settlement proposals, asset division worksheets, the kind of paperwork any divorcing couple might discuss over dinner. But every single page was actually evidence of Jaden's spending patterns, her legal consultations, her systematic research into community property laws. The jewelry caught my attention the moment she walked through the door. Diamond earrings I'd never seen before, a gold bracelet that looked expensive enough to require a separate insurance policy, and a necklace that probably cost more than most people's car payments. All purchased with our joint account while she was filing for divorce, apparently. Nothing says financially vulnerable widow like dropping $3,000 on accessories during marriage counseling. Oliver, she said, sliding into the booth across from me with that soft smile that used to make me feel protective. Thank you for being so reasonable about this. I really think we can work everything out amicably. I gestured to the jewelry. I see you've been shopping. Her hand went unconsciously to the necklace. Oh, I bought it weeks ago. Before any of this started, I was saving it for a special occasion. Interesting. Because according to our credit card statement, she'd purchased it yesterday afternoon, right after our conversation about quick settlements. Should we look at the documents? I asked, sliding the folder across to her. Of course. She opened it eagerly, her expression shifting to confusion as she scanned the first page. Oliver, this isn't a settlement proposal. This is our credit card statement. Keep reading. She flipped through the pages, her frown deepening. Financial records, legal consultation bills, internet search histories showing her research into expedited divorce procedures and asset protection strategies, all organized chronologically to show exactly when she'd started planning this divorce. I don't understand, she said, but her voice had lost that confident edge. Why are you showing me these? I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us, making sure the recording app was visible. Because we need to have an honest conversation about what you actually want from this marriage, and I think it's important to document it. For the first time since I'd known her, Jaden looked genuinely rattled. Oliver, you're being paranoid. Why would you need to record our private conversation? The same reason you researched community property laws before, telling me you wanted a divorce. The same reason you consulted with a divorce attorney before mentioning we had problems. The same reason you've been systematically learning our financial situation while pretending to be confused by basic legal concepts. She stared at the phone like it might bite her. This is ridiculous. You can't just record people without their consent. Are you consenting to this recording? Absolutely not. I reached over and stopped the recording, then started a new one. This is Oliver Gonzalez, Tuesday evening at Rosario's restaurant. I'm here with my wife, Jaden Patterson, and I'm asking her permission to record our conversation about our divorce settlement. Jaden, do you consent to being recorded? No, I don't consent, and this whole thing is insane. I stopped the recording and put the phone away. That's fine. I have plenty of documentation already. The color drained from her face. What do you mean plenty of recordings? Our conversation last week about community property laws, the one where you explained how California handles asset division in detail, despite claiming you'd never been divorced before. Our discussion about expedited settlement procedures, your very informed opinions about joint property rights. She was shaking her head before I finished talking. Those were private conversations between husband and wife. Even if you recorded them, which is illegal, they wouldn't mean anything. Wouldn't they? I looked past her toward the restaurant entrance, where 3 men had just walked in. Jesse in his worn denim shirt, looking calm and determined. Tom Rodriguez, a stocky man in his 50s, wearing a cowboy hat and boots. And David Kim, younger than the others, carrying a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Actually, I said, watching Jaden's face as she followed my gaze, I think they'd be very interested to hear about your legal expertise. She spun around in her seat, then back to me, panic starting to creep into her expression. Oliver, who are those men? What's going on? Jesse approached our table first, nodding politely. Evening, folks. Mind if we join you? We're having a private conversation, Jaden said quickly. Please leave us alone. I don't think we've been properly introduced, Tom said, pulling out a chair. I'm Tom Rodriguez. I was married to Jennifer Walsh. Lovely woman. Took half my cattle operation. David sat down without invitation. David Kim. My ex-wife was Sarah Chen. Great gal. Really understood my grief. Cost me my hardware store. Jaden's breathing was getting shallow. She looked around the table at the 3 men, then at me, and I watched her realize that her victim routine wasn't going to work on an audience of people who'd already heard it. Oliver, she said, her voice getting higher. I don't know what these men have told you, but they're obviously disturbed. This is harassment. Jesse opened his folder and laid out wedding photos. This is me and Jessica Martinez on our wedding day. Beautiful ceremony. She wore white. Tom added his own documents. Here's Jennifer Walsh. Same woman, different hair color. She really committed to the role. David spread out more photos. Sarah Chen was blonde when I knew her. Pixie cut. Very stylish. I watched Jaden cycle through emotions faster than I could track them. Denial, anger, panic, calculation. She was looking for an escape route, but there wasn't one. Not anymore. This is insane, she said, standing up abruptly. You're all obviously working together to harass me. This is some kind of conspiracy. Other diners were starting to notice the commotion. A man at the next table was openly staring. The hostess was looking concerned. Ma'am, the restaurant manager appeared at our table. Is everything all right here? We have a private room available if you'd prefer to continue your discussion there. No, Jaden said quickly. I'm leaving. This is harassment and I'm not staying for it. But when she tried to step away from the table, Jesse blocked her path. I think you should hear what we have to say, he said calmly. Especially about the federal charges. Federal charges? Jaden's voice cracked. Identity fraud across state lines, I said, keeping my voice low enough that only our table could hear. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The kind of charges that come with serious prison time. She whipped around to face me. You contacted the police? Law enforcement, yes. Multiple jurisdictions, actually. Turns out when you use false identities to commit marriage fraud in 3 different states, it becomes a federal matter. This is harassment, she said, but she was backing down into her chair. You're all obsessed with me. You can't handle that I left you. Obsessed? Tom laughed bitterly. Lady, you stole my livelihood. You destroyed my family's ranch, Jesse added. You took everything I worked 20 years to build, David said. The manager was still hovering, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Other diners were definitely watching now. Listen, I said quietly, meeting Jaden's eyes. Everyone here knows exactly what you are. You're a marriage fraud artist who targets widowers using false identities. You research your victims, manipulate their grief, isolate them from family, and steal their assets. She stared at me like I'd slapped her, and I realized that for the first time in 8 months, I was seeing her without any mask at all. No victim routine, no manipulation tactics, no careful performance. Just a woman who'd finally run out of moves. The silence stretched between us while she processed what was happening. Her quick settlement was never going to happen. Her victim story wouldn't work on people who'd already lived through it. And the evidence sitting on this table was enough to destroy not just her divorce plans, but her entire operation. I watched her face as she realized her options were rapidly disappearing and she was going to have to face the consequences of her systematic deception for the first time in years. The restaurant manager appeared again, this time with a forced smile that didn't quite hide his discomfort. Because nothing says fine dining experience like a table full of people accusing each other of federal crimes while other customers try to enjoy their pasta. Folks, I really think you'd be more comfortable in our private room, he said, gesturing toward the back of the restaurant. It's quieter there, and you'll have more privacy for your discussion. Jaden looked around desperately, like she was hoping someone would rescue her from this nightmare. But the other diners were either staring openly or pointedly avoiding eye contact, and the hostess was practically hiding behind her podium. That's a great idea, I said, standing up. Lead the way. No, Jaden said quickly. I'm not going anywhere with these people. This is harassment. But Jesse was already gathering his documents, and Tom was putting his cowboy hat back on. David closed his folder with a satisfied snap. Ma'am, the manager said gently, I really do think the private room would be better for everyone. And that's when I saw something I'd never seen before in 8 months of marriage. Jaden's composure completely shattered. Her hands started shaking as she looked around the table at 3 men who knew exactly what she was, at documents that proved every lie she'd told, at a husband who was no longer buying her victim routine. The confident woman who'd filed for divorce just days ago was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood she was trapped. Fine, she whispered, but I want it on record that I'm being coerced. The private room was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and a round table that sat 8. The manager closed the door behind us, and I watched Jaden flinch at the sound, because now there was no audience to perform for. No exit strategy, nowhere to run. Jesse spread out his documentation like he was laying cards on a poker table. Wedding photos, marriage certificates, divorce papers, financial records. 3 years of systematic investigation laid out in chronological order. This is what we call a pattern, he said calmly. Jessica Martinez in California, Jennifer Walsh in Texas, Sarah Chen in Arizona, Jaden Patterson back in California. Same playbook every time. I don't have to listen to this, Jaden said. But she was staring at the documents like they might disappear if she looked hard enough. Actually, you do, I said, because I've already contacted authorities in 3 states about your systematic identity fraud. The color drained from her face. You what? Wire fraud, conspiracy, identity theft across state lines. Tom said helpfully. Federal charges, not state, means serious prison time. You're lying, she said, but her voice cracked. You can't prove any of this. David opened his folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Bank records showing identical financial patterns. Property transfers using false identification. Marriage licenses with forged documents. 3 victims willing to testify about your methods. And that's when I watched her switch tactics again, but this time cycling through them so fast I could practically see the gears turning. Oliver, she said, turning those blue eyes on me one last time. You know me. You know I'm not capable of this. These men are obviously coordinating some elaborate revenge fantasy because they can't accept that I left them. Coordinating, Jesse repeated. That's an interesting word choice. Because coordination is exactly what we've been doing. 18 months of building evidence, documenting patterns, preparing criminal referrals. Criminal referrals? FBI field office in Sacramento, I said, pulling out my phone to show her the email confirmation. Submitted this morning with documentation from all 4 cases. She grabbed my phone before I could stop her, reading the screen with growing horror. Because there it was in black and white. A federal case number, an assigned agent, a request for interview scheduling. This is entrapment, she said desperately. You set me up. You made me come here under false pretenses. False pretenses? Tom laughed bitterly. Lady, you're lecturing us about false pretenses? I pulled out a manila envelope I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Here's the deal, Jaden, or Jessica, or Jennifer, or Sarah, or whatever your real name actually is. My name is Jaden Patterson, and I'm your wife, and I have legal rights. You have a choice, I continued, ignoring her protests. Option 1. You sign a quitclaim deed removing yourself from my house title and disappear from this area permanently. Tonight. Or, Option 2. You face federal prosecution for identity fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud across multiple jurisdictions, with no cooperation credit and the full weight of evidence we've assembled. She was shaking her head before I finished talking. I'm not signing anything. I'm your wife, Oliver. I have community property rights. You can't just steal half my assets because you've had some kind of paranoid breakdown. Community property rights, David said slowly. Using false identification documents. Good luck with that legal argument. That's when my phone rang. My family attorney, right on schedule. Excuse me, I said, stepping toward the corner of the room. Richard? Yes, we're ready for you. Private dining room at Rosario's. Bring everything. Jaden's eyes went wide. You called your lawyer? 20 minutes ago. He's been waiting in his office with prepared paperwork. What paperwork? I hung up and smiled at her for the first time in days. And it wasn't a nice smile. Divorce petition on grounds of fraud. Motion to void any property settlement based on identity fraud. Emergency. Injunction protecting my assets pending criminal investigation. You can't do this, she said. But her voice was getting higher, more desperate. We're married. I have rights. Rights based on fraudulent identification documents? Jesse leaned forward across the table. Here's what's going to happen next. The FBI agent assigned to your case is expecting my call tomorrow morning. I'm going to tell him whether you cooperated or not. Whether you made restitution or fought every step of the way. Restitution? You stole $300,000 from Tom's ranch sale, David said. $400,000 from my hardware store. $200,000 from Jesse's property settlement. That's $900,000 in documented theft, not counting whatever you were planning to take from Oliver. I didn't steal anything, she protested. Those were legitimate divorce settlements. Using false names and forged documents, Tom pointed out. Which makes them fraud, not settlements. The door opened and Richard Peterson walked in carrying a briefcase that looked like it weighed 40 pounds. My family attorney for the past 15 years, a man who'd helped me with Carmen's estate planning, and knew exactly how much I stood to lose. Oliver, he said, nodding to me before surveying the room. Are we ready to proceed? Ready, I confirmed. Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal documents thick enough to stop a bullet. Mrs. Patterson, I'm Richard Peterson, Mr. Gonzalez's family attorney. I understand you're facing some choices this evening. Jaden looked at the paperwork like it was a live snake. I don't have to talk to you. I have my own attorney. Morrison and Associates, I said helpfully. $8,000 in consultation fees over the past 2 months. Expensive advice for someone who claims to be financially naive? She shot me a look that could have melted steel. Because I'd just demonstrated that I knew exactly how long she'd been planning this divorce, exactly how much she'd spent preparing to destroy me, exactly how calculated her whole operation had been. The federal charges will proceed regardless, Richard said calmly. But cooperation could make a significant difference in sentencing. A demonstrated willingness to make restitution, to acknowledge wrongdoing, to avoid putting victims through lengthy trials. What kind of difference? Plea agreement with reduced charges versus full prosecution in multiple jurisdictions, Richard explained. The difference between 2 years and 20 years, depending on how many counts the prosecutor decides to file. And I watched her do the math, because for all her manipulation skills, she was fundamentally practical. 20 years in federal prison versus signing away her claim to a house she'd never had any right to in the first place. This is extortion, she tried one more time. You're threatening me with false criminal charges to force me to give up my legal rights. False charges? Jesse laughed. Lady, I've got 3 years of documentation and 2 other victims willing to testify. Nothing false about it. Tom pulled out his phone. In fact, David and I have statements prepared. Want to hear what we told the FBI about your methods? No, she said quickly. I don't want to hear anything. But Tom started reading anyway. Subject typically approaches targets through grief support groups or online dating platforms, presenting herself as a widow seeking emotional connection. She demonstrates detailed knowledge of property law and divorce proceedings while claiming financial naivety. Stop, Jaden said. She isolates targets from family support systems by creating conflict and positioning herself as the reasonable voice encouraging family harmony, David continued. She researches financial assets extensively while claiming disinterest in material concerns. I said stop. She files for divorce exactly 1 month after being added to property deeds, citing irreconcilable differences while requesting substantial financial settlements, Jesse finished. Identical timeline in all 4 documented cases. The room went silent except for Jaden's ragged breathing, because they'd just laid out her entire playbook, like an instruction manual, and she was realizing that every move she'd made had been predictable, documented, and anticipated. I need to call my attorney, she said weakly. Go ahead, Richard said, sliding the phone across the table. But I should mention that Morrison & Associates dropped you as a client this afternoon. Her face went white. What? Professional ethics rules. They can't represent someone who obtained their services using false identification. Potential criminal liability for the firm. That's impossible. Richard pulled out another document. Letter from their managing partner. Delivered to your listed address at 2 p.m. today. I watched her read the letter, watched her realize that even her legal team had abandoned her, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like the relief of watching a long nightmare finally end. You're all insane, she said, but there was no fight left in her voice. This is all some elaborate conspiracy against me. Conspiracy, Tom repeated thoughtfully. Another interesting word choice, because conspiracy is exactly what you're charged with. Conspiracy to commit fraud across state lines. Fine, she said suddenly, reaching for the quitclaim deed Richard had placed on the table. I'll sign your stupid papers, but I want something in return. You're not in a position to negotiate, I said. Actually, I am. And suddenly that calculating look was back in her eyes. The predator recognizing one last opportunity. Because there's something you don't know, Oliver. Something that changes everything. What? She smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. A cold, satisfied smile. That made my stomach drop. I'm pregnant. The room went dead silent. Richard stopped shuffling papers. Jesse leaned back in his chair. Tom and David exchanged glances, and I started laughing. Not polite laughter, not nervous laughter. Deep, genuine, from the belly laughter that went on long enough to make everyone else uncomfortable. Something funny about potentially being a father? Jaden asked, her confidence returning as she played what she obviously thought was her ace card. I wiped my eyes and looked at her with something approaching pity. Jaden, I had a vasectomy after Carmen died. Her smile faltered. What? Outpatient procedure at Kaiser Permanente, March 15th, 2022. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving children orphaned if something happened to me. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling to my medical records app. Want to see the documentation? The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. That's impossible, she whispered. We're married, and I've been recording our conversations for weeks, I added helpfully, including the one we're having right now. So your threat to claim false paternity is also documented evidence of attempted fraud. That's when she finally broke completely. Not crying, not anger. Just the complete collapse of someone who'd run out of moves, out of lies, out of ways to manipulate the situation. She sat there staring at the quitclaim deed like it was her death sentence. How long? She asked quietly. How long what? How long have you known? I thought about lying, about pretending I'd figured it out earlier than I had. But the truth felt better. Since yesterday, when Jesse showed me the wedding photos, she nodded slowly like this made sense. And you've been planning this whole thing since then? Recording you, coordinating with the other victims, consulting with my attorney, preparing federal criminal referrals, yeah. My accountant brain, I added, is actually pretty good at building cases from financial evidence. She picked up the pen Richard had placed next to the quitclaim deed. If I sign this, she said, if I disappear like you want, what guarantee do I have that you won't pursue the criminal charges anyway? None, I said honestly. But Jesse, Tom, and David will recommend leniency to the prosecutor. They'll testify that you cooperated, made restitution, showed remorse. And if I don't sign? Richard answered that one. Full prosecution across all jurisdictions. Multiple felony counts. 20 years minimum, probably more with the pattern evidence. She signed the deed without reading it. Just like that. 3 quick signatures removing her from my house title, from my property rights, from my life. The thing she'd spent 8 months manipulating me into giving her. Gone in 30 seconds. There, she said, sliding the papers back across the table. Are we done now? Almost, Jesse said. You need to be out of the area by tomorrow night. New state, new city. And you stay away from this region permanently. Fine. And if we hear about you targeting anyone else, Tom added, anywhere, the deal's off and we pursue full prosecution. I understand. I looked at this woman I'd shared a bed with for 8 months, this predator who'd used my grief as a weapon against me, and felt nothing. Not anger, not betrayal, not even relief. Just empty exhaustion and the distant recognition that I'd finally stopped being a victim. That's when the door opened and my family walked in. Stephanie first, carrying her purse like a weapon and looking ready for battle. Then Addison, her eyes scanning the room and taking in the legal documents. The defeated woman at the table. The 3 strangers who'd helped save her father from his own stupidity. Finally, Marcus, hanging back by the door like he wasn't sure he wanted to witness whatever was about to happen. Dad? Addison said, looking between me and Jaden. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. Jaden was just signing some paperwork. Stephanie's eyes went straight to the quitclaim deed on the table, then to Richard's briefcase full of legal documents, then to Jaden's defeated posture. Oh, she said quietly. Oh. And I could see her putting it together. The private investigator she'd hired. The concerns she'd been raising for months. The family discussions where I'd accused her of being paranoid and jealous. The realization that she'd been right about everything. Mrs. Patterson, Richard said formally, you're free to go. The papers are filed. The arrangements are complete. Jaden stood up slowly like she was carrying the weight of the world. She looked at my family standing by the door, at the 3 victims who'd coordinated to stop her, at the attorney who'd stripped away her last legal protection. Finally, she looked at me. You could have just paid me, she said quietly. I would have taken half and disappeared. You didn't have to destroy my entire life. You destroyed your own life, I said. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine. She walked toward the door and my family stepped aside to let her pass. No dramatic exit, no final threats, no last-minute manipulation attempts. Just a woman who'd finally run out of victims to exploit. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and then she was gone. Out of my house, out of my life, out of my family's future, and for the first time in 8 months, I could breathe again. The ride home was the quietest 40 minutes of road noise I'd ever experienced. Stephanie drove because my hands were still shaking. Not from fear or stress, but from the pure adrenaline rush of watching 3 years of systematic manipulation crumble in real time. Addison sat in the passenger seat staring at her phone, probably trying to process what she'd just witnessed. Marcus was in the back seat next to me, occasionally glancing over like he was seeing me for the first time. Which, honestly, he probably was. Dad? Addison said as we pulled into my driveway. When you said you'd been recording her conversations? For 3 weeks, I confirmed. Ever since Jesse first contacted me. You've been planning this whole thing for 3 weeks? Building the case, coordinating with the other victims, working with my attorney. Yeah. Stephanie turned off the engine but didn't get out of the car. Oliver, I owe you an apology. Actually, you don't. You were right about everything. I was right about her being dangerous, she said, turning around to face me. But I was wrong about how to handle it. I treated you like you couldn't take care of yourself. And there it was. The thing that had been eating at our relationship for months, finally out in the open. You hired a private investigator, I said. I spent $2,800 trying to prove she was lying about her background. Money I couldn't afford, investigating under the wrong name, finding nothing. She laughed, but it wasn't happy. Meanwhile, you were already 3 steps ahead of me. I wasn't 3 steps ahead of anything until Jesse showed up. Before that, I was exactly as clueless as you thought I was. Marcus cleared his throat. Dad, we need to talk about something else. Here it comes, I thought. The lecture about family unity and forgiveness and not being vindictive. Addison and I have been talking, he continued, and we need to admit something that's going to sound pretty awful. I waited. We weren't just worried about you emotionally, Addison said quietly. We were worried about the inheritance. The honesty hit harder than any manipulation Jaden had tried. Mom left us that house, Marcus continued. It's been in our family for 26 years. And when you added Jaden to the deed after 8 months, you thought I was throwing away your inheritance for some woman who didn't deserve it, I finished. Yes, Addison said simply. And that made us focus on protecting our financial future instead of protecting your happiness. I looked at my kids, both adults now, both struggling with the same thing I'd been struggling with. How do you balance love with practical concerns? How do you protect family without destroying relationships? You want to know something funny? I said. The house deed thing is what saved us. If I hadn't made that mistake, we never would have known what she was really after. We sat there in my driveway, 4 people who'd spent months misunderstanding each other, finally having the conversation we should have had 8 months ago. Can we go inside? Stephanie asked. I want to see what she left behind. The house felt different the moment we walked through the front door. Not just because Jaden was gone, but because the oppressive feeling I hadn't even realized was there had lifted, like someone had been slowly turning down the volume on my life for 8 months, and now everything was suddenly crystal clear again. Her closet was empty except for 2 wire hangers and a receipt from a boutique where she'd spent $400 on a purse 3 days ago. Our bathroom counter showed the ghostly outlines where her expensive skincare products had been arranged. The kitchen had been cleared of her specialty teas and organic snacks that cost twice what regular food cost. But she'd left the dishes in the sink. Because of course she had. Classy, Addison muttered, loading plates into the dishwasher. My phone rang as we were standing in the living room, surveying the space where her furniture used to be. Richard Peterson calling with an update I'd been waiting for. Oliver, the quitclaim deed has been filed and recorded. The house is back in your sole ownership as of this afternoon. Relief flooded through me so completely I had to sit down. What about the divorce settlement? I asked. Filed and approved. She gets nothing from marital assets, and there's a permanent injunction preventing any future claims against your property based on that marriage. It's ironclad. And the criminal referrals? FBI field office confirmed receipt. They'll be contacting Jesse and the other victims for formal statements within the week. After I hung up, I looked around at my family and realized something had shifted. They weren't looking at me like I needed protection anymore. They were looking at me like I was someone who could handle protecting himself. Jesse wants to come by later, I told them. Him and Tom and David, they want to organize evidence for legal action in other states. Can we help? Marcus asked. That surprised me. You want to help? Dad, you just took down a professional con artist using accounting skills and strategic thinking. Yeah, we want to help. 2 hours later, my dining room table looked like a war room. Jesse had brought 3 banker's boxes full of documentation. Tom had printed financial records going back 5 years. David had created a timeline spreadsheet that would have made any CPA proud. And I was in my element. Look at this pattern, I said, spreading out bank records across the table. She times her property transfers exactly the same way in every case. 4 to 6 weeks after marriage, deed transfer. 2 to 4 weeks after that, divorce filing. It's the timing that makes it wire fraud, David explained to my family. She's using interstate communication to coordinate financial crimes. What's the prosecution timeline looking like? Stephanie asked. Jesse pulled out a letter from the FBI field office. They're fast-tracking it because of the multi-state pattern. Grand jury could convene within 60 days. I watched my sister, who'd been right about everything, but felt powerless to stop it, suddenly come alive as she helped organize evidence. I watched my kids, who'd been trying to protect family assets through confrontation and guilt, throw themselves into systematic legal preparation. For the first time in months, we were working together instead of against each other. Oliver, Tom said, I can't thank you enough for what you did tonight. 3 years I've been chasing this woman, and you managed to trap her in one evening. You gave me the roadmap, I said. I just followed your research. No, you did something we couldn't do. You made her think she was winning right up until the moment she signed those papers. Jesse nodded. The recording of her threatening false pregnancy? It's going to destroy her credibility with any prosecutor. No plea bargaining when there's evidence of ongoing criminal intent. As the evening wore on, I found myself watching my family work together and thinking about how wrong I'd been about so many things. I'd thought their concerns about Jaden were jealousy and interference. I'd thought their attempts to warn me were about control and possessiveness. But they'd been trying to protect something real. Not just money or inheritance, but family stability and my own well-being. They'd just been terrible at communicating it without making me defensive. And I'd been terrible at hearing their concerns without shutting down. You know what the weird part is? I said to Stephanie as we organized victim statements. You trying to control the situation actually made me more vulnerable to her manipulation. How do you mean? Every time you warned me about something, I defended her harder. I proved my independence by ignoring good advice. She used my stubbornness against me. Stephanie was quiet for a long moment. I did the same thing after Mom and Dad died. Decided you needed protection whether you wanted it or not. And I decided I needed to prove you wrong whether it made sense or not. So we both screwed up. We both screwed up. But sitting there organizing evidence with people who actually wanted to help instead of control, I realized something else. The experience of building this case, of coordinating with other victims, of using my professional skills to solve a personal problem, it had given me back something I'd lost when Carmen died: confidence in my own judgment. For 2 years after Carmen's death, I'd second-guessed every decision. What she would have thought about selling her car. Whether she'd approve of me changing the guest room into an office. If she'd want me to date again at all. And then I'd met Jaden, who seemed to understand my grief and support my choices, who made me feel like my instincts were trustworthy again. Except she'd been manipulating those instincts the entire time. But tonight, building this case and watching it work exactly as planned, I'd remembered something important. My judgment wasn't broken by grief. It was just being used against me by someone who understood vulnerability. Dad, Addison said, looking up from the timeline she was creating, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you going to date again? I mean, after all this? I thought about it. Eventually, maybe, but with better boundaries this time. What kind of boundaries? No shared property until at least 2 years. Background checks that go deeper than a Google search. And if my family has concerns, I'm going to listen instead of getting defensive. Even if we're wrong. Especially if you're wrong. Because you being wrong about someone means they've earned my trust. You being right means they're trying to hurt me. Marcus looked up from organizing financial documents. So you're going to trust us to have your back? I'm going to trust all of us to communicate better. No more secrets, no more manipulation, no more trying to protect each other by controlling each other. Around 9 o'clock, Jesse's phone started buzzing with texts. Tom's neighbor just called, he said, reading his screen. Says some woman showed up at Tom's old address looking for him. Brunette, driving a rental car, asking about his current contact information. We all looked at each other. She's not done, David said grimly. Oh, she's done, I said, pulling out my phone. But not because she wants to be. I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for Linda Morrison, who ran the local neighborhood watch program and had a network of communication that could spread information faster than social media. Linda, this is Oliver Gonzalez on Maple Street. I need to put out a community alert about someone who's been targeting local widowers with marriage fraud. Yes, it's urgent. 20 minutes later, my phone was buzzing with callbacks from neighbors who'd either seen suspicious activity or wanted more details about the warning. The beauty of living in a close-knit community is that word travels fast when people need to be protected. By 10 o'clock, every grief support group, senior center, and social organization within 50 miles had been notified about Jaden's operation. Her hunting ground was effectively burned. That should keep her away from this area, Jesse said with satisfaction. Forever, I agreed. Tom gathered his documents and stood to leave. Oliver, you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever get. What's that? Hope that she'll actually face consequences. David packed up his timeline materials. More than that? You've given us a playbook for other victims. This strategy could work anywhere she surfaces. But Jesse lingered after the others left, helping my family organize the remaining evidence. You mind if I ask you something? He said as we boxed up financial records. Go ahead. How do you feel now that it's over? I thought about it. 8 months ago, I'd been a grieving widower who thought he'd found someone to share his life with. Tonight, I was a man who'd successfully defended his family from a predator using skills I'd forgotten I had. Proud, I said finally. For the first time since Carmen died, I feel proud of a decision I made. Good, Jesse said. You should. After everyone left, I stood in my living room looking around at the space that was finally mine again. Really mine, with legal documentation to prove it, and a family who trusted my ability to keep it that way. My phone buzzed with a text from David Kim. Dinner tomorrow night? My treat. Want to celebrate justice served? Before I could respond, Tom Rodriguez had added to the group chat. Count me in. We should make this a tradition. Jesse replied immediately. I'll bring the wine. And then Stephanie chimed in. Room for family at this celebration? I looked at my sister, my kids, these people who'd spent months trying to protect me in all the wrong ways, who'd spent tonight learning to work with me instead of around me. Absolutely, and I typed back. My house, 7 o'clock, I'll cook. Because for the first time in 8 months, I wanted to host a dinner in my own home. I wanted to cook for people who respected my judgment and trusted my decisions. I wanted to celebrate not just getting rid of a predator, but rebuilding relationships on foundations that actually made sense. As I locked up the house that was legally and completely mine again, I realized something else. I wasn't the same vulnerable widower who'd been desperate for connection 8 months ago. I was someone who'd faced down systematic manipulation and won using strategy, patience, and the support of people who actually cared about my well-being. Tomorrow night, I'd host a dinner for my family and the stranger who'd saved us all from our own worst instincts. We'd celebrate justice served, but more importantly, we'd celebrate relationships rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect.